Welcome back, friends, to Unleash Your Light with Luz. Today's episode is one that hits very close to home, literally. My guest is someone I've admired and known for years, and whose story reminds us that where you start doesn't define where you'll end up. Rachel DiSalvo, or as many know her as Rachel the Realtor, grew up in Brooklyn during the 80s and 90s, navigating a world that could be as tough as it is vibrant. She went from surviving her neighborhood to traveling the world as a fashion stylist to eventually finding her calling in real estate, helping families build generational wealth and discover the power of owning a home. In this conversation, Rachel opens up about her childhood in New York and the challenges that shaped her resilience. Her story is one of grit, reinvention, and a true example of what it means to unleash your light. So let's dive in, friends. Rachel, thank you so much for coming to my podcast. You definitely have been someone that I have been wanting to talk to. You have definitely been someone who I've admired, who's inspired me throughout the years. For those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about you.
I'm Rachel DiSalvo. I'm known to most as Rachel the Realtor. I often refer to myself as a Brooklyn street kid who made it out of the hood. I'm a friend, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a titi. And most of all, I always try to be a blessing to anyone who I run into.
And I can attest to that. You have been such a blessing. As you heard, she is a realtor, so she helped me find my house. But you were so patient and you showed us so many houses. And she's like, we're going to find you that house. Don't worry. And you sure did. You delivered. All right, Rachel. So let's get into it. Tell us a little bit about little Rachel. How was your upbringing? Where did you grow up? Where's your family from so people can get to know you?
I grew up in Brooklyn in an area called Canarsie and East New York. I was born in Brownsville, Brooklyn, Brookdale Hospital. I feel like you can't be from New York and not mention the hospital you were born in. So Brookdale Hospital, big ups. I'm Puerto Rican and Sicilian. My mom's Puerto Rican, my dad's Sicilian. So I had like the Brooklyn Italian guy as my dad, AO, like that. He was tough. He was, assertive. He was brash in many ways. He still is. He's just aged up a bit, so he's a little less severe with it. And so basically, I was a good mashup of like Fania All Stars and rock from the 70s and 60s. I mention music a lot because it is a big part of who I am. I feel like there's a soundtrack to my life, and so I feel like it's given me a very diverse palette for music, and just also for being able to kind of merge and mesh with many people. I think my introduction to like the real world was going into high school, where Brooklyn Tech had about 6,000 students and they came from a multitude of backgrounds. So it was also an overwhelming experience because there were so many people around me on a daily basis. And again, I took a bus and 2 trains to get there. So it was kind of like, now's the time to kind of become a grown up. Also, the experience that I had in getting into that school, my mom got very ill when I was about 10, 11. And so by the time in junior high school, when it was time to test into specialized high schools, your parents usually took you to those schools to introduce you to them. And my mom had been paralyzed by a stroke. So she was unable to drive me and certainly unable to take the train with me. So she literally said, hey, here's some money. Here's a map, because we didn't have iPhones back then. And if you get lost, ask a cop. That was kind of my first foray into real independence. And I did make it into that school, and I'm glad I did.
And I feel like that's a very similar, a lot of kids who were raised in New York City, that's a very similar experience, because I remember myself as well. I grew up in Queens, just walking to school. I was not close enough. I was too far.
Oh, for the bus?
I wasn't far enough to be able to take the bus.
Okay.
So my brothers and I had to walk. And that's really I feel like kids who are born and raised in New York City, we have no other choice but to grow up a little bit faster in that sense, right?
Right. I think it's where you earn your stripes as a kid in New York. So it does make us a unique breed when you compare that to kids that, have a parent pickup line in front of their school. And God bless them. That's a really wonderful way to grow up. I think though that it makes us independent early, and also we learn how to navigate and figure out problematic moments. And if anyone has taken the subway, they know that those can arise, especially if you're taking it on a daily basis. Another thing I would say about my childhood was that it was a weird dichotomy of like childhood stuff, playing tag, doing normal kid things, and also just kind of navigating around the violence that was taking place in Brooklyn in the 80s and the 90s. And that's something that I think deeply changed who I was as a kid, and also is something I carry with me as an adult. So looking back and with obviously adult eyes and having a better understanding of how growing up in Brooklyn in the 80s and 90s, or New York City in the 80s and 90s, could affect my outcome. And one thing I'm really proud to say is that I was able to not become a statistic of what was happening to the people around me during that time. And I'm sure that you would agree that that's something you can relate to as well. Just being a kid in the boroughs and having to make your way around, there was a lot of options of what could have happened. There were a lot of pathways we could have chosen. And so I remember being really good at learning from other people's experiences without having to go through what they were going through. And I don't know where I got that ability, and I'm so grateful I did have it.
You said that growing up in the 80s and the 90s in New York City, and like you said, there was a lot of crime, there's a lot of things going on, drugs, that it changed you. Can you just tell me how exactly did that change you?
Sure. I think as a very young child, I realized that there were negative outcomes that could arise if I made the wrong decisions. I know many adults my age that can look back and remember either counting crack vials, collecting crack vials, like trying to sweep them up and get them out of the way so they could play, seeing people ODing, or people involved in the violence that came with, the drug trade. I pretty much remember witnessing my first shooting around 4. And that was in Brownsville, a kid running down the street away from someone and someone shooting at him. And I was sitting on a stoop of my grandma's house, and I wasn't allowed to go off the stoop because it was a rough area. But I remember everyone screaming, "Get in the house, get in the house." And in that moment, you realize as a child that there is an opportunity to be unsafe. And I think safety and stability is a core necessity for most children, right? For all children. But when you grow up in environments where there aren't always those elements, you learn to navigate and you learn to be very self-preserving, right? So how can I avoid these situations? And my parents, for the most part, worked really hard to make sure I wasn't being exposed to those things or involved in those things. But at that time, everyone was, in some way affected by those things.
Isn't it incredible how at 4 years old, sometimes we don't normally remember a lot of things at 4 years old. Mm-hmm. Yet at 4 years old, you remember that.
Yeah.
And those are the things that I feel too that really do mark us. Obviously, that was very impactful, so you remember it. I also remember growing up in Queens and seeing these colorful vials, right? With the colorful tops. And I didn't know what they were. And I was always a very imaginative kid. I didn't know exactly what was. I was also very naive. I didn't know exactly what it was. And I used to just imagine, I don't even remember what I used to imagine, but I just know that I never thought it was drugs until I got a little older. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. No, I think as a kid, you don't understand what drugs are. I remember, the adults around that used to smoke weed and they called it trees. And I thought it was just like broccoli. And it wasn't, it wasn't until I was older where I would look back and be like, that was weed. Because I would also call broccoli trees. So at dinner, I would say, "Can you pass the trees?" as a kid, and then hear it in other people out and about and think, wow, there's, what are they doing? Why are they rolling up broccoli? What is that? And so I look back on those moments and I think, there were some very pivotal moments where I've had visceral reactions to what was going on around me. And I knew, maybe I didn't know in the moment, but looking back, I know that those were pivotal moments because I made decisions based on that experience. So based on seeing this person unconscious, I don't want to be like that. So I will make a different decision, or I will avoid whatever that person was doing, even if I didn't have a full understanding of what they were doing.
So when you were going to Brooklyn Tech, right?
Yep.
Were you going for something in particular? Like, did you have a specialization? I know that it's a specialized school. So was there something that you were really interested in? Why?
I was interested in getting out of my neighborhood, to be honest, and not going to my zone school. So one thing that did happen that I'll lightly mention is that my sister had been attacked in junior high school. She was attacked by people with knives and blades, and she was, injured. And that was also another act of violence that I internalized. And I myself, in the same junior high school years later, was attacked by someone who, injured me with I don't know if it was a knife or what, but I was essentially sliced on my body and didn't realize until I made it home. And I knew that I had to get out of that neighborhood because it was just totally crabs in a barrel. And I was always an intelligent kid, and I really, attribute that to my family. My dad is totally a nerd about a lot of things. He's a tough guy, but he's really smart about so many subjects. And he always had me in a book, always explaining something to me, always into science. And so I knew I couldn't stay in a neighborhood where essentially they were always looking to beat you down. And I had to fight my way out of there. And so I did. And I knew if I took the tests, I would have at least a chance, because I didn't even know, when you would get that big encyclopedia of high schools, I hadn't really visited any of those schools. And I didn't have the opportunity because my mom was so ill at the time. I applied for LaGuardia because I could sing, but I didn't have anyone to take me for that audition or practice. I didn't even know what that looked like, right? At least now the kids have the internet so they can find the kids that did it before them. And I said, hey, I'll take this science test. I'm going to take the book and study it and see if I can get into one of these science high schools. And I remember my cousin at the time saying, I don't know why we're taking this test. We're not going to pass. I'm not going to pass. And I would say, well, if you're going to continue to say that, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're certainly not going to pass if you don't believe you can pass. And I just kept studying. And she came along with me to take the test, and I ended up passing, and unfortunately she did not. And I think that's very evident in the direction that our lives took after. For me, it was a way out. And I remember, I'll never forget.
Hey there, are you tired of feeling stuck in the endless cycle of work, motherhood, and house duties while your own dreams and passions quietly take a back seat? Do you find yourself longing for a slower, more intentional life? One where you can still pursue your goals, enjoy your family, and actually breathe without all the stress and overwhelm? Well, you're not alone. This season of life is asking you to do things differently, and I can help. As a wellness and certified life coach, I work with women who are ready to take back control of their time and design a life that truly fits who they are now. You'll learn how to say yes to what matters most and no to everything else without the guilt. My coaching is about helping you gain the confidence to show up fully and courageously to pursue your next chapter without burning out in the process. If you're ready to break free from the hamster wheel and live on your terms, I invite you to book a free 30-minute coaching call with me. Together, we'll create a plan to help you reach your goals and finally find the time freedom you've been craving. Go to the link in the show notes to book your free call today. It's time to reclaim your time, your energy, and the life you desire.
And I said, hey, I'll take this science test. I'm going to take the book and study it and see if I can get into one of these science high schools. And I remember my cousin at the time saying, I don't know why we're taking this test. We're not going to pass. I'm not going to pass. And I would say, well, if you're going to continue to say that, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're certainly not going to pass if you don't believe you can pass. And I just kept studying. And she came along with me to take the test, and I ended up passing, and unfortunately she did not. For me, it was a way out. And I remember, I'll never forget the day that the test results were announced. In my school, out of 200 kids that took the test, only 6 passed. And I was one of them. And I remember my teacher, this is how terrible the public school system was at the time. And there were great teachers, unfortunately, sometimes they were the anomaly. Yeah. But I remember I think it was an English teacher or social studies teacher, reading off the names, or he heard the names over the loudspeaker. And when my name was announced, he said, there must be a mistake.
What?
And I said, why would there be a mistake? And he was like,
terrible.
Yeah. And he was like, you got into Bronx Science, you got into Brooklyn Tech. And I didn't get into Stuyvesant. That was the hardest one. It was probably the math. But I will always remember that he said, there must be a mistake. And that probably fueled the fire in me to prove that it wasn't a mistake. But as a kid, you always question those kind of things. Like, why would an adult say that to me? I think that there were many instances throughout growing up where, and I'm sure that's for a lot of kids, people are people. So they, no matter where they are, they may make mistakes and say things that they shouldn't say. And they don't realize how jarring that could be to a kid's spirit.
Yeah, that still boggles my mind though, that as an educator, you don't understand that your words to a student matter. To this day, I mean, I've even in my daughter's school, sometimes the things that they say, I am just like, why? How is this possible? But another topic. But I'm very curious to ask you, did you feel like, I understand you said like your parents were a big part of you like wanting more, but was there something inside of you that just told you like I need to get out, or I'm meant for something more? Or it was just simply that, just the idea of like, this is terrible and I just need to get out?
So I think throughout the years, there were always glimmers of hope. I had great examples that I would run into, just as much good, or rather, just as many bad examples. I think that I was met with some sort of balance where there were good glimmers of hope. Whether it was like a chorus teacher or, any special teacher that really took a liking to me and could see my potential. And sure, I wasn't an angel as a kid either. I was a smart mouth. I was a tough girl because I had to be. And, it was eat or be eaten back then in a lot of ways. And so I really appreciate the teachers that noticed what was in me and wanted to help pull it out, and also show me or advise me of what could be. I remember I had a friend in elementary school who had a summer house, and they owned their co-op. They lived in a co-op, and they also had a summer house in Fishes New York. Never even knew that was a place. And I went there for her birthday, and I remember thinking, how do they have two places to live? What? Like I came from a family of renters, and to be clear, I lived in rent stabilized, rent control housing. And then when my mom was ill, I moved into the housing projects with my cousin, which was extremely violent. But my cousin was, incredible to me. She was a protector, and she made me cool with style. If I have any style, I give it to two cousins who helped me get there. And then as time went on, and I started to get a little older, around 13 or 14. I think I was in high school. My aunt and uncle bought their house. They bought a house in Staten Island. It was a really nice house on a corner. And I think it was somewhere around $400,000 or $500,000. And I knew they didn't have $500,000. So I was like, how did they get this house? Who gave them $5,000? And it turns out they used my uncle's VA loan. He was a career military man. And they were able to secure their primary home. And it was awesome to me because I thought, wow, they did it. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. And why is it so mysterious to us? Like, what is this mortgage and how do you get one? I think I always put a pin in it. Like, I'm going to figure that out someday. That was a conversation that traditionally in my world was only had amongst men or really wealthy people on TV. That wasn't something that they were talking about over the dinner table too often, or, hanging out at barbecues or anything like that. It wasn't a conversation. It was more so the rent is going up, or it's so expensive these days. And in fact, I even went to housing court a couple of times to avoid eviction from my mom when she got ill. So I felt like I wasn't really privy to those conversations. So when I had instances where I saw people that were homeowners and were purchasing property, I was very curious and intrigued as to how they did it. And I hated not being a part of those conversations. I mean, maybe I'm just nosy, but I just felt like it was a little bit of a boys' club conversation. The dads would talk about that kind of thing, the interest rate and things, but I just had no idea what that was. And so that fueled me, I think, in some way. I didn't rush into real estate. And instead I did go to college, and I got involved in fashion, and I did that for a while.
Why do you think that particular, like those two instances were so impactful? Like you remember them. It's the idea of like owning property. First your friend has a second home and you're like, how do they do that? And then here is your aunt buying a home. And to some kid, some other kid, it could have been like, oh, okay, cool, but to you, it
Right.
really stuck with you. Why do you think that is?
Because housing court is a terrible place to visit, honestly. And I looked around at people that were struggling, and I just felt like there has to be a way where ownership is important, don't get me wrong, but it was also about leveraging someone else's money so that you can essentially build wealth. It wasn't just about owning the house. It was the folks that are involved in real estate purchases had a whole different trajectory than the folks that were in housing court. And of course, not every renter ends up in housing court, but those were the glasses that I was looking through, right? I was going to housing court, fighting a dispossess, fighting eviction, making payment arrangements because my mom got ill and was unable to catch up on the rent at some point. So for me, being kind of like a parentified child at that time, I think when I went to housing court, I was probably around 16, 17. Wow. Yeah. So I was there as her representative because she couldn't make it. And obviously I couldn't enter into certain agreements on her behalf, but I was able to answer for her. And then, they would tell us what we had to do. So just having that experience and also looking out at other people. So going to Brooklyn Tech, I was in school with kids that came from neighborhoods like mine, as well as some of the most expensive neighborhoods in New York. I went to school with diplomats' kids, school with kids of politicians, kids of millionaires, and kids that were just like me, right? I remember I had a couple of kids that I used to ride the train to and from school with, and we kind of relied on each other to not get killed.
Where did you go to college? What did you study? Like at that time, like what did you want to what did you want to be? Who did you want to be?
It's funny because I just never knew. I just wanted to be something. I just wanted to be Rachel and be better. And I did go to college. I went to CUNY and SUNY. I started in CUNY, and I was a part of a very small fashion program in CUNY. And it was taught by some of the faculty of FIT. And that's how I eventually got courted over to FIT, which was awesome. It was a fantastic experience. I am a college dropout because I got hired while in college to travel the world and do wardrobe styling and help with casting and costume design. And so that kind of led me on a whole nother journey. But I did do, quite a few years in college and then just ended up not finishing because I was really attracted to like the allure of working in television and working with famous people. And it was an amazing time in my life, and I learned so much. I met so many people. During the time that I was in college, there was a specific class, urban sociology, where I learned about how neighborhoods and cities were formed, specifically New York and New Jersey, and Henry Hudson and all of the folks that were building the bridge and folks that were working and living in the tenements in New York, and the affluent folks that moved out to Brooklyn, and they would take their 2-hour ferry ride to get to work in the morning. And those things really inspired me because I always loved the history of our neighborhoods here in the tri-state area. And I always said, hey, at some point I got to get back to that. I feel like I had that at least 2 or 3 times in life where it was like those winks, like this is what your path is, but maybe you need to go over here and learn life before you get to it. And so that class, I was probably the best student in that class. And I wasn't necessarily the best student in college always, but I never missed it. I was like front and center. I read all the books. There was a segment on it about gentrification and how neighborhoods turn over, and also redlining and some of the disadvantages that people of color and people in underserved communities faced. I would say faced, but actually these instances still occur. And so it was really enlightening to me, and also connected the dots of kind of where I came from and where I would eventually go. I went ahead and I studied fashion, like I said, and I went ahead and had a fashion career for 8 or 9 years.
Wait, before we go into the fashion, I want to say, like, isn't it interesting how you said, like, those, I would like to call them also like God winks. It's almost like he was, like, you were seeing glimpses of things that you really were meant to do. And also at that moment, did you even know that being in real estate was an option? Like, as you were going through college and going through that class, because I know that for me, that's happened to me. And I'm like, if I knew then what I know now, I think my path would have been a little bit different, but I think this is the path that we're supposed to go.
So it's funny you say that, because I didn't know any of the jobs that I had were real jobs. I didn't know that any of the jobs that I took as an adult were actual jobs that people had. I stumbled into them. And I was always interested in real estate, but no, I didn't know how to make money in real estate. I didn't know where I fit in real estate. But funny enough, my sister used to work for a real estate office as a teenager. And she is now a full-time real estate agent as well, who works with me. And in my mind, I never connected that being a realtor was an option for us, because realtors didn't look like us back then. Especially in the office that she worked in, they had a very specific look. They were generally much older. They were typically not Hispanic. And there were women, because real estate is one of the fields where women really excel. So sales has always been like that for women. At a certain point became very female dominated. Coincidentally, I did not know that becoming a wardrobe stylist and costume designer was a real job either. I stumbled into that job on set one day. A friend of mine was a director. I happened to be there. I saved the day from an emergency that took place with their wardrobe stylist. And then I was hired. And then I was hired and traveling and packing up suitcases. And Janice, my friend, and I, who was working with me as a partner in styling at the time, we got called for an editorial shoot that was going to take place that weekend. And we pulled about $60,000 worth of merchandise. And this was not styling how kids style today on Instagram. It's not just, I dressed myself. We were lugging 70-pound, suitcases with us everywhere, rolling racks, packing the car to the brim, jumping out of vans and dressing people. So I didn't know that was like a real thing. I didn't know you can get paid for doing that. And then I ended up having a pretty lucrative career in that world. But real estate was always in the back of my mind. And I had some life-changing experiences that required me to make some changes in my lifestyle. And it led me right back to real estate, which has been a savior for me.
I did a video shoot with you and you were styling. I can't remember. I'm getting old and I can't remember exactly. But I remember that's really where I got to know you and Janice for a video shoot that we were doing. And you guys you did have all the clothes on the hangers and everything. It was like full-blown fashion styling. I was very impressed.
Yeah, we weren't I rarely dressed up for shoots. In fact, I got stopped by a makeup artist once and she was like, "Are you the stylist?" Because I was wearing sneakers and a t-shirt. I mean, it was a really physically demanding job. We carried things. We did have messengers at times, but sometimes the time constraints were so tight that we just had to make things happen. In fact, those skills have carried over to my career in real estate, because problem solving is a huge component of just being an entrepreneur, right? So if you work for yourself, there are going to be issues that come up that you have to navigate. There's nobody in HR, there's nobody in management that's going to help you. But you learn those skills that you need later on in life from the experiences that you have. So those experiences were really important, even if I wasn't participating in what I am doing now. And who knows what I'll be doing in the future. But I genuinely love this career. I've been doing it for almost 15 years now. And I know that if I hadn't had those experiences of entrepreneurialism as a wardrobe stylist and a costume designer and working on set with casting, then I wouldn't even have a fraction of the gumption I have to get through some of these deals today. And so I think for anyone younger than me, because I'm still pretty young, I think all the experiences are necessary. Having all of those experiences, being a beginner at whatever it is, being a beginner is so important. Learning from those that came before you, learning from those that are slightly ahead of you, and just not being too good to learn, not being too good to shadow, not being too good to show up and come from contribution. I think that's what really helped me evolve as a person.
Thank you so much for listening and for watching. If you're here with us on YouTube, I hope that today's conversation inspired you, moved you, or gave you something to think about. If you want more resources, links, and information from this episode, everything is in the show notes below, so be sure to check that out. And if this resonated with you, share it with someone you love. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, or hit that like button. It really helps grow the show. Until next time, friends, keep going, keep growing, and keep unleashing your light.